Hey, welcome to FreeThinking Ministries. I'm Dr. Tim Stratton, and let me tell you just a little bit about this organization. I founded FreeThinking Ministries, focused on theology and apologetics back in 2015. And then we launched freethinkingministries.com on January 1st, 2016. And a couple of years ago, we started being active on YouTube. Now, this was largely because of David Wood. In 2019, Dave and I, along with many others, we were in Israel together. And one night we were having dinner, and Dave yelled across the restaurant and said, "Hey, Stratton, 2008 called. They want their blogs back." I'm like, all right, point taken, Dave. So he encouraged me to start being active on YouTube. So that's why we're here now. Well, over the years, many bright minds have joined forces with FreeThinking Ministries and contributed to our website and our YouTube channel. Timothy Fox has led the way, along with other notable contributors such as Adam Coleman and many more. You know, I'd be remiss if I did not mention Scott Olson's contribution as the voice of the Free Thinking podcast. And if you don't subscribe to that, make sure you do. Well, recently, a new kid on the block has come around. Josh Klein has been writing some great blog articles for the website that have received much attention. And one thing's led to another, and now not only is Josh a regular contributor, but he's officially joined the Free Thinking Ministries team. So it's my pleasure to introduce Josh Klein to our audience. Please welcome Josh Klein. There he is. How you doing, brother?
Hi, Tim. Good. It's good to be here.
It's good to have you here. Good to have you on the team. And, you know, you're a fellow Nebraskan. So, you know, we're both diehard Husker fans. That means we've experienced much pain and suffering lately.
Yes, in the pit of misery, some might say. Yeah.
That's right. So, man, I've got a bunch of questions I want to ask you. But before we get started, would you just kind of tell our audience a little bit about you, maybe give a short origin story and where you're at and what you're doing now?
Yeah, great. Well, I'm the son of a pastor, and Tim knows my dad pretty well.
That's right.
Worked with each other at Kearney Evangelical Free Church for a while, and grew up as a Christian, came to know Christ as a young age. But I really didn't follow Jesus until probably my junior year in high school. I mean, I was the good kid, but I was not a disciple of Jesus Christ. I just knew not to get in trouble, and I call it fire insurance. I thought, you know, I had hell insurance. I could do whatever I wanted besides that. But I went to a conference my junior year in high school, and Francis Chan spoke, and it just hit me that Jesus died for me, and I am not living for him. And God called me into ministry in that moment and said, "You're gonna follow my lead and go into ministry." And so I say that's the time I believed in Jesus. I trusted him. But my junior year in high school, that's the time where I actually chose to follow him. And we can get into what that means as far as salvation goes, when that started or whatever. But I know that that's the point where I was an active disciple and not a passive disciple of Jesus. So then I went to Grace University, met my lovely wife there, was in ministry for 10 to 12 years. Was out of ministry for a little while, and then reached out to this guy I knew, Tim Stratton, was like, "Hey, I enjoy writing. I've enjoyed what Free Thinking Ministries does. I'd love to contribute if you'd let me." And graciously said, "Yeah, even though you're not a Molinist yet, I'll let you contribute." And that's where it started. And it's just been great. I've loved seeing the growth on the YouTube channel, growth on the website, hearing the stories of how you've interacted with kids at UNK. And so through our conversations, we were like, "Hey, let's go from Kearney and let's get some inroads to Omaha too." I'm looking forward to helping out any way that I can and provide a biblical perspective on cultural issues. That's really what that's what I love doing. Did youth ministry for a lot of years, and that was the biggest questions. They didn't ask a lot of philosophical questions. Some kids did, but mostly it was like, "Hey, my friend's gay. How do I share with them the gospel?" And it was like, man, you got to think of about that stuff. And so I spent a lot of time in that realm, and this gives me an avenue to reach a wider audience. And so, yeah, thank you so much for bringing me on and being part of the ministry.
Yeah, people send me emails all the time asking if they can write a blog on the website. And when you first reached out to me saying, hey, you'd be interested in writing for the website. Well, I mean, I got to say, since I worked with your dad, I was like, all right, well, and I didn't really know. I mean, we knew each other, but we weren't friends or anything like that. But of course, I've known of you since 2006. And, your dad would talk about you quite a bit. Yeah, when you contacted me asking me if I'd be interested to let you write an occasional blog or whatever, I'm like, well, okay, since I respect your dad a lot, I'll give you a shot, and then you sent me a draft and I was like, wow, this is good. And I thought, wow, you've really got a great way of writing and communicating. And so then that led to another one, and that led to more and more. And every time I was like, wow, these are home runs. So, so one thing has led to another, and now you're part of the team. Tell me, what was it for you that made you decide you wanted to be an official member of the FreeThinking Ministries team and not just an occasional contributor?
Yeah, well, I boil it down to God's providence and sovereignty over my life. Really closing a lot of doors in ministry. But this was one that just kept opening. And I thought, I'm having a really great time writing these things. I love what FreeThinking Ministries is about, what they're doing. And so I was like, I'd love to be a part of this. And I didn't know what that meant. No clue. I was just volunteering. And so I reached out and was like, I think I'm ready to enter into this type of mission field. And I think in a post-Christian culture, which is what we really are, you got to have missionaries. And that's what I see FreeThinking Ministries as. It's a mission organization. We're knowing God and making him known. We want to help current believers establish a foundation of their belief based on biblical values. And we want to share and challenge the culture with the gospel of Jesus Christ. The reality of what real love is, that's a big hobby horse, not hobby horse, I guess that's a big focus of mine, is let's define our terms and what love is. And I thought, you know what? FreeThinking Ministries is a place that allows me the platform, the opportunity to do that. And Tim, you've just been very gracious and like, hey, let's enter the spiritual battle together. And it's just been great. So that's why I decided to, because I thought this gives me an opportunity to share the gospel with people. Really point blank. That's what it is. And sometimes Christians need to hear the gospel even more than unbelievers.
Oh man, that's the truth.
Yeah.
I just saw a poll or some kind of study that came out just in the last day or two that said, right now, those who claim to be Christians, it's either claim to be, of the population of the United States. Now that's people who claim to be Christians. And again, I don't have the study in front of me, so I might be getting something wrong here, but I think that used to be much higher. And maybe it might have been just a belief in God, but I think this was about Christianity in particular. Obviously, just a few years ago, it was over 90% of our population believed in God. Well, now, at least as far as those who claim to be Christians are concerned, it's 2/3 of the population. And the estimate is that by 2070, those who claim to be Christians, it's only going to be 1/3 of the population. Now, that's if the church doesn't step up its game and start taking apologetics seriously. It just drives me nuts to see most churches, most evangelical churches, or those who would claim to be traditional Christians and Bible-believing Christians, don't contend for the faith and don't provide reasons as to why Christianity is true. And if the church doesn't get its act together, I think Christians being 1/3 of the population in 2070 would, I don't think it's going to be, that's going to be generous. That's right. Yeah. So come on, church, get your act together. But thank God for people like you, Josh, that have a desire and a passion to do apologetics, to take theology seriously, and to show how it interacts with culture today. So anything you'd like to say about that?
Yeah, I go back to Jude. I think we live in a Jude generation.
Hmm.
I love the beginning of Jude where he says, "Hey, I wanted to talk to you about our common salvation, but we gotta. I have to talk to you about contending for the faith because false teachers have snuck in unbeknownst to us and have derailed the gospel." And that's what he spends all of Jude talking about.
Mm-hmm.
And I'm really convinced that's happened to the American church. We've got
Yeah.
a lot of competing gospels. I watched your interview with Elisa. I got it right the first time.
Yeah, Elisa Childers. Yeah.
Elisa Childers, and just another gospel. I think she's 100% right that we've got competing gospels, and we've got to be on the forefront of contending for the faith in our culture. Yeah,
that's right. Amen to that. Well, that's what we're laser focused on doing here at FreeThinking Ministries, and you do such a great job of that. So, really want to encourage people to go to freethinkingministries.com. You can also get there by FreeThink Inc. That's INC. FreeThinkInc.org, and make sure you follow everything that we publish there. And if you do that, you're going to see tons of stuff from Josh as well as from our other contributors. So with that said, Josh, tell the audience a little bit about your new role, what you're going to be laser focused on doing and how you're going to be going about it. And then also what gets you really excited about this specific role and ministry in general.
Yeah, well, joining FreeThinking Ministries is great. And really, I see my role as primarily kind of a three legs of a stool. Writing, so adding content. There'll definitely be blogs coming out, but that's not going to be my only responsibility. Yeah. Speaking as well, get an opportunity to speak about gender identity and identity in general at Brookside Church in Omaha coming up in October. Cool. So super excited about that. And then also networking. I think churches, a lot of times, I think they want to take apologetics and thinking through these things seriously, but they just don't have the tools. They don't know how. They need to bring people in, and churches in Omaha are no different. And so being able to network with churches in Omaha, Lincoln, across Nebraska and say, hey, we are available and willing to help train, help equip, and help share the gospel with your congregation, with your community. And so that's kind of the three prongs, I guess, that I would say that I'm doing. I'm super excited for all of them, but the church networking, that stuff I'm really excited about too, because I love contending with the faith with fellow believers. You know, we got to go into battle together. And I think there's a lot of great churches in Nebraska, and I would love to see Nebraska be like the epicenter for revival in the United States. Like all of a sudden you're seeing people contending for the faith in Omaha and Lincoln, and people are going out to Kansas City and then to Des Moines, and then all of a sudden it's just like spider web ripples out to out to the nation. And so, you know,
well, what about that little town called Kearney?
Yeah, Kearney. Yeah, Kearney too.
Yeah, you know, Nebraska is in a good spot to be that epicenter. I mean, we are literally the bullseye of the United States of America. You know, right where I live in Kearney is 1,733 miles, I believe, from San Francisco, and 1,733 miles to Boston. So we're right smack dab in the middle. So I agree with you. When we first started FreeThinking Ministries, I kind of had that same vision. Let's see what theologians and apologists we can find here in Nebraska, and let's start a movement, and let's see some ripple effects. And I hope that happens.
Yeah, I think it is, and I think it will.
Yeah.
You got people battling together. That's part of the reason I joined. You know, it's like, hey, let's go.
Yeah. And right there in your neck of the woods, you got Scott Olson, who does the FreeThinking podcast with me. And he's currently also working on his master's degree in philosophy. And about 30 miles from me, we've got Richard Ang, who is a youth pastor at an E-Free Church in Holdridge, Nebraska, at Trinity Church there, and he's also recently graduated with his master's degree. Did you go to school together? Because he got his undergrad from Grace.
I think he was a little bit after me.
Okay.
Maybe a
Okay.
few years, but I
All right.
I know of him. I even have his the book. What's
Yeah.
Heaven Like? Yeah, I
That's
got
right.
that. So
Yeah. And he actually helped launch FreeThinking Ministries, and we still do some work together. And he's gone on to get his master's degree in apologetics from Houston Baptist University. And there's others here in the area who are pursuing more theology and apologetics-based degrees, and just pursuing ministry like you are. So yeah, let's see what God does here, but I'm excited about it. So, all right. So you've written multiple blog articles for our website, and what, have you been doing this for a little bit over a year now, right?
yeah, regularly. I think my first one was in 2020.
Okay.
But then I didn't contribute for a little while, and
Right.
but regularly, really the last 6-7 months have been really regular.
Right. Right. Yeah. So okay. So out of all your articles that you've written for the website, what's your favorite one that you've written so far, and tell us what it's about?
Yeah. Well, two kind of come to mind. Well, technically 5, but I did a 4-part series on homosexuality and a culture of identity.
Right. So we'll just count that as one.
Yeah, we'll count that as one because it really was one thought broken up into four articles. But I spent a lot of time and effort thinking about that over the years, and just felt like it was something that some things that needed to be addressed, because I feel like the church has really dropped the ball in a lot of ways with that community, to share the gospel with them in a way that's loving but truthful. And the reason I picked those is because we ended up getting an email from a guy in Indiana that said, "Hey, I've been struggling with this. I came across these articles, and committing my life to Christ, committing my life to celibacy." And it's just, that's the stuff you want to see. Just people that realize the law of Christ is because he saved me. And so I can sacrifice my sexuality, whatever I think my identity is, because he sacrificed himself on the cross for me. So there's that one. And then I did a response to a Time article that you had texted me and said, "Hey, there's this article. Would you respond to it?" It was kind of the first time you'd asked me to write something that I actually had the time to focus on.
I don't even think you really had the time to do it. You didn't have the time to respond to Time.
Yeah.
but I didn't either. And I saw this piece on Time that Time published. And I was like, man, I want to respond to that. But I was drowning in other responsibilities. And so I reached out to you. I'm like, dude, can you do this? And you're like, oh, I don't have time either, but wow, we got to do that. And you're like, I'm going to make time to respond to Time. So tell people about that article. What was Time talking about?
So Time, the shootings in Buffalo and then in Uvalde, Texas, they wrote an article trying to link that sort of thing to Christian nationalism, whatever that term means. I think it's just a catch-all term for people that they don't agree with. Right. But it was really a poorly researched and poorly reasoned article. And so really it didn't take a lot of time to do some really basic Google searches and respond. So as I read it, I was like, yeah, I can definitely respond to this fairly quickly, because it was like they didn't even really try. They just wanted to say Christians are to blame. And so that was just a response to them saying, no, Christianity, throughout history, there have been issues that people, yes, I will 100% agree. People have done things in the name of Christianity that are evil, that they shouldn't have done. But that is not a result of Christian theology. That's a result of Christians twisting scripture or twisting theology. Yeah. And so that's kind of the response to say, actually, when Christianity is taken seriously in its orthodox sense, it actually is a net positive for culture. That's where hospitals came from. That's where orphanages came from.
Universities.
That's where universities came from.
Science.
Yeah, science. All of that. All of the good things, really, that you think about have really come from Christian minds. And then to gloss over the evils of atheistic frameworks like communism that has taken millions and millions of lives under the guise of atheism, is really, I think, an unfortunate way to attack a problem of people, I think, struggling with an identity issue
Yeah.
and thinking, I want to get famous, or I'm blaming an entire group of people. Actually, what they need is the gospel. That's actually the answer. And so that's what the article was about. So, yeah.
Yeah, it was very well written. And you bring up Christian nationalism. That's something that I want to talk about more moving forward. A couple of years ago, I think it was in 2019 actually, that I wrote an article. I think the title was "Should Christians Be Against Christian Nationalism?" And it was really I'd started to hear that term being thrown around, and I was like, well, what does that mean? First of all, I know what it means to be a Christian. What does it mean to be a nationalist? And then I saw this document floating around where several pastors and theologians and philosophers were signing, saying that they're against Christian nationalism. And I'm like, oh, okay, well, at least maybe I can read this and find out what a Christian nationalist is. And I was like, well, based on what this says, there's no reason to be against it. And I just thought it was a bad document. And so I've actually then saying, well, look, if you think Christianity is true, and you think the theological and philosophical foundations of the United States of America are true, namely the Declaration of Independence. By the way, it is a theological document. When people say that the United States isn't a Christian nation, well, sure, I'll give you that. It's not technically a Christian nation, but it is founded upon a theological framework where we get our objective and unalienable rights. And I do think that that's the best philosophical foundation that any country, any nation of the world has ever had. And although we have been far from perfect, I think our nation has done some really good things for the world. And, not perfect. We've done some really bad things too. But I think it's fair to say we have been great in our past, and although far from perfect. And but since I think that our nation has the best philosophical and theological foundation, and I think Christianity is true, and I think those two work together, well, in that sense, I say, well, I'm a Christian nationalist. Now, if you want to start saying, well, that means you're a racist, I'm like, well, then you're not a Christian.
Yeah.
A Christian cannot be a racist by definition. I mean, if you call yourself a racist and a Christian, you are confused, right? So anyway, there's a big difference between white nationalism, that's evil, but I say, but Christian nationalism, I think Americans should be. If you're a Christian and an American, I think it makes sense to say, yeah, in that sense, I'm a Christian nationalist. But hey, maybe I'm missing something. What do you think?
Yeah. No, I think you're right. I think really it's when it comes from progressive circles, and often it's kind of a projection issue. And what I mean by that is, interestingly enough, conservative Christians, who are often called the Christian nationalists, are actually very libertarian in how they want to allow people to live their lives. And so the idea of Christian nationalism is, don't force your belief system on people who don't believe the same as you. I think that's right. That's the idea. But conservative, Christian, we don't want abortion, but that's not just a biblical issue, although it is a biblical issue, but that's a human rights issue. Those are human beings, and so that's where the argument comes from. And so I think that the projection comes with the same people who will say, I don't want Christian nationalists, are the same people who will say, well, but we need to tax people to pay for other people's things. We need to, well, why do you need to do that? Because that's what Jesus wants us to do. And I'd be like, well, that's a flavor of Christian nationalism that I can't get behind, because it violates, the law of theft. And I'd say that's more like a bad form of Christian nationalism than saying, hey, we want this nation, which was founded on Christian principles. It really was. The idea that it wasn't would have been very surprising to the founders, by the way. If you were to go back in time and say, hey, James Monroe, this is not a Christian nation, he would have said, what are you talking about? He would have been like, well, then what is it? But yeah, I think you're
Just let
correct.
me jump in real quickly. Steve Williams wrote a 4 different blog articles for our website. I think off the top of my head, I believe the title of these was the USA's founding fathers or founders had Christianity in mind, or something along those lines. And then he's written a 4-part series on that, even talking about Jefferson, who, as time went on, his theology kind of got worse and worse. But at the time of the founding, at the time that these documents were written, he shows how even Jefferson had Christianity in mind when he was crafting these documents. So it's well written, 4-part series. I encourage people to take a look at those.
Yeah, and I wrote an article on the separation of church and state.
Yeah,
and how actually the way people perceive that. First of all, it's not in the Constitution.
Right.
But second of all, the way people perceive that principle is actually the opposite of what it's supposed to be. The church is supposed to influence the state. The state is not supposed to influence the church.
Amen.
And we actually do it backwards.
Yep.
Yeah.
All right. So you like to talk a lot about these, how our theology should impact these cultural issues. And amen to that. As a systematic theologian, that's my passion too. That's why I spend so much time studying the nature of God and the nature of man. And when we understand those two things, we can start talking about culture. But let's shift gears now and talk about apologetics. What's your top? Give me your top 3 arguments for the existence of God, and then, if you have to pick one, what's your fave? And tell us why.
Yeah, well, I have a master's in divinity, so I'm not a philosopher by trade, but I think we all need to be aware of good arguments for God.
Right. Any good theologian, and pastor should be.
Yes.
Right?
So probably my favorite is the Kalam cosmological argument, made famous by William Lane Craig. In fact, it was that argument when I was having a crisis of faith. It was that argument that really helped ground me. It was like, yes, it makes sense that everything that begins has a cause, and then as you follow that logic train down the road, you find out that, well, then there needs to be an unmoved mover or an uncaused cause, that sort of thing. The fine tuning argument, I think, is one of my favorites as well. I do think that I tend to think that atheists actually don't quite understand the point to that argument sometimes, because I've heard counter arguments saying, well, why would God need to create this vast universe if it was just for us? But that's not theologically accurate. The fine-tuning argument is it's created in such a way that life is possible, but creation is for God, not for man. And I think that's the answer. But I find that one very convincing too. But probably my favorite one is the moral argument, because I think that it actually takes facets of all of those to arrive to, well, there needs to be an objective morality. You can't organize society around subjectivity. We've tried it. It doesn't work. We're trying it right now. It's not working very well.
Right.
And you can't live life that way. You just can't. It's not livable. I think Sean McDowell says, one of the tests for truth is it livable? And I think the objective morality argument gets away from the weeds of some of the philosophy and science, or at least attempts to, and helps us to ground that in, okay, why are some things really right? Why was Hitler wrong?
Right.
If he would have won the World War II, why would he still have been wrong? And I think that argument holds a lot of water for me.
Yeah. I was just on the campus of UNK yesterday, as at the time of recording anyway, and asking students this question. I asked many students. I'm like, okay, well, if Hitler would have won World War II and then gone on to kill or brainwash every single human who disagreed, and so 100% of humanity, 100% of people on the earth all saw Hitler as a moral hero, would they all be wrong? And the vast majority of students, even those who weren't Christians, they take a step back and they're like, yeah, they'd still be wrong. You know, right? They know
Yeah.
that, that would still be wrong, even if everybody thought it was right. So then the next question was, what makes that true? How do we ground that? How do we understand that? And it was so much fun to watch students who had never thought about that, even some Christian students who had never thought about that, try to make sense of that. And, you know, I think of this one, there's this track athlete. I remember he walked through the doors and he saw our table and he saw the question on the whiteboard that I was holding up. And he was just like, God grounds morality, and he just left. I'm like, good job. But then there was others, this one Christian young lady who I was talking to, and I'm like, well, what makes that right? What makes this? What makes it true that Hitler would have been wrong, even if everybody thought he was right? And she could not answer the question. And finally, I said, do you think it's a God? You know, as a Christian, do you think it might be God? And then having to explain that to her.
Yeah.
But it was so much fun, though, to even talk to the atheist students or the agnostic students who realized, there's this objective morality. And when I asked them to try to explain that, they could not do it. And then finally, I'd say, do you think it might be God? And they're like, oh, no, it can't be. Why would, and I said, well, think about this. And I said, if God created humanity on purpose and for a specific purpose, then there would be objective facts about humanity, irrespective of the subjective opinions from humanity. And so there would be this fact of the matter about how humans were created to live. And that would be true apart from our opinions. And then I said, and if Christianity is true, God would give us free will so that we could choose to act according to reality or to reject reality. And so when people reject reality, like Hitler did, and act opposed to reality, we can say, Hitler, you stand opposed to reality and the facts, the objective facts of the matter. Therefore, you deserve blame and condemnation. So I think I agree with you. I think the moral argument, and Dr. Craig has said this too, the Kalam is his favorite argument, but the moral argument might be the most powerful argument and the most persuasive, because everybody makes moral judgments every single day. But you can go through your entire life without having to think about Big Bang cosmology and infinite regresses, right? So you got the Kalam, fine-tuning, and the moral argument are your top three. The moral's your favorite. All right, let's go the other direction.
Okay.
What apologetics-based argument for God's existence do you find the least persuasive?
The apologetics argument for God's existence, the least persuasive?
Yeah. What do you think is the worst of the arguments that are commonly advanced?
I think the worst one is argument from experience. I think experience is important, but it's not authoritative.
Right.
You can argue with people's experiences all the time. People say you can't argue with experience. You actually can. If a kid comes home and says, hey, I flew in the I'll give an example. My son, when he was 4 or 5 years old, was convinced that he drove the van by himself home. Now, it was a dream, but he was convinced that he did that. And he said, in my experience, this happened. But you can actually derail experience through logic, through scientific. Nope. They used to think that spontaneous generation of maggots from meat, because it's an experience. You don't see it; it's there. And you can really refute experience. Now, it can be powerful. Stories are powerful, but an argument for God's existence because I say so, I think you need more than that. And that's one that I think is kind of the weakest.
Yeah, and I don't see that as much as an argument for somebody else, but as an argument to yourself.
Yeah.
Let's just say, Paul had an interaction with the second person of the Trinity on the road to Damascus, right?
Yeah.
So let's say he went through a crisis of faith down the line, a few years later. Let's say he started to doubt his faith, and then he can remind himself, well, wait a second, I had this experience with Jesus that I cannot deny. And so I think similarly, if for those of us, I don't think this is common I mean, some people will say, well, every Christian has that inner witness of the Holy Spirit. If that's true, not every Christian realizes what it is. And I think it's fair to say maybe that many Christians have that kind of an experience with God that they can't deny. I've had that. I mean, I find it when I went through my crisis of faith as a youth pastor back in 2008, when students were challenging my worldview. I mean, students in my own youth group were giving me arguments for atheism that sounded really good to me at the time. The reason why I didn't just pack it up and stop being a Christian was because before I found the arguments, I rested upon, wait a second, I've experienced God. I've experienced crazy answer to prayer that I can't explain, too many times. I can't, since it's happened so many times, I can't write it off as coincidence. I've seen and experienced a couple miracles, or what I took to be miracles anyway. Something that just couldn't make sense. I mean, even when doctors and scientists are saying this doesn't make sense, but it happened. I've just seen too much of that. So those aren't arguments. My personal experience isn't an argument for somebody else, but it's an argument to me. Does that make sense?
Yeah, and I 100% agree. Like, I think you have a lot of like Muslim women and men that come to know the faith because Jesus is appearing in dreams to them, or I've heard lots of those stories. Those are great experiences that brought them into the faith, but I don't know that they're persuasive for somebody else to be convinced. Sometimes they can be, but generally speaking, not. But yeah, personal experience, when you have that, you can definitely rest back on it. That's great. But it's also not something that you have to strive for. Like, I think some people, if they've never seen a miracle in their life, or perceived a miracle in their life, I would say, they can rest back on the truths of Scripture, truths of Word, truths of God's Word, who He is, who Jesus said He is, and understand that the miracle of their belief, the miracle of their birth, just the fact that they exist, is a miracle. They can rest on that. But I think those other arguments for other people, when you're talking with somebody, I think people just kind of gloss over a lot of times when you start with experience. I think you got to start with something else and say, and I know this to be true because of my personal experience. So, yeah.
Well, I think a lot of times, I think about that whole controversy on, the inner witness of the Holy Spirit. Dr. Craig talks a lot about that. I was having a phone call with Tim McGrew the other day, and he said something interesting, and he said something along the lines of, it might not be an inner witness of the Holy Spirit, but almost a subconscious or an inarticulate grasp of all the reasons as to why Christianity is true without being able to verbalize it. Sometimes people do understand these arguments. It's like when I first heard the Kalam, I was like, oh yeah, I guess I already knew that. I mean, but it just finally, all the dots were connected, and I could now express it and see it and articulate it and verbalize it and discuss it and debate it. But before that, I already knew it, but I didn't know how to talk about it. Same with the fine tuning argument. I remember being in college and really trying to wrestle with, when I was doing my undergrad, thinking, well, why is something right for somebody? Why would something be wrong for me that's right for somebody else just because they were raised differently? Well, I didn't understand the moral argument at the time, but I had this subconscious idea or understanding of it. I just couldn't talk about it at the time. So anyway, these arguments help to put flesh on those bones. Now, I think, like you said, they argue, if you lead the discussion, if somebody says, why should I think that Christianity is true? And you lead with your personal experience, I agree with you. I don't think that's the best way to go. It's probably the worst way to start your conversation. But I would say, once you've done the arguing and done the heavy lifting, throw your argument from experience on top as kind of a frosting on the cake, I guess, or cherry on top of it.
Yeah.
So what do you think?
No, I 100% agree. And actually, I'm gonna go back a little bit because another argument just occurred to me that I think is actually worse than leading with experience. It's leading with accusation. When
Wow.
when someone says, "Oh, you're an atheist," well, the Bible says, a fool says that
You're
there is
right.
no God. Um, you might get pats on the back from other people. It's like, you got him with it, but he doesn't believe in the Bible. So he's like,
Mhm.
okay. So that's probably worse argument.
Mhm.
Now, if you're just saying, hey, we're sinners, that's not accusation, but like calling someone a fool because of they don't know what they don't know.
Yeah.
Like, they're ignorant. They might not be a fool. They might be a pretty wise person. Talk to them first, and they might come to a knowledge of Jesus. But that accusation puts up defensive barriers. They're not going to talk to you. Uh,
Mhm.
they don't care what you have to say after that. So
Yeah. Yeah.
yeah,
Well said. Well said. Well, I mean, I'm a little disappointed that, one of your top three wasn't the free thinking argument. I mean, come on, Josh.
fair enough.
Um,
Yeah,
but I'm glad that it wasn't your least favorite. So we're still friends. Um, a lot of people will say that the ontological argument is the least persuasive. And I see their point. I don't think it's persuasive, but I do think it's sound. I think it's a good argument. And I use that argument more for Christians to strengthen their faith when they're in times of doubt, and to also show Christians how you ought to be viewing God as a maximally great being. But I don't know. I can't recall a time where I'm doing evangelism on the street or on the college campus where I've shared the ontological argument. I've taught the ontological argument in classes, and if I'm, speaking at a apologetics conference somewhere, I will teach it. I will offer it in that setting, but I've never shared it to a non-believer when I'm trying to show them that God exists. What do you think about the ontological argument?
I I like it because, like you said, I think it's sound. I think it makes you think bigger than yourself, and
Hmm.
that's why I like it better than some of the others. It's not purely scientific. It's not purely introspective. It makes you think of, well, yeah, if I I guess if there is a maximally great being, he might exist. The reason I don't know that it's particularly persuasive is because I do think it feels abstract. So
Yeah.
when you're talking to people about it, they just kind of dismiss it because it's hard to even conceive. Like,
Hmm.
a maximally great being. What do you
And that's what it's
mean?
all about. That's
Yeah,
what it's all about, is
exactly.
being able to conceive
Yeah,
of. If it's,
yeah.
I think, let me see if I get the Latin right. I'm probably going to butcher it, but I think it goes like Anselm wrote, aliquid quo nihil maius cogitari posit, or something like that. And that's talking about a being in which nothing greater can be conceived. And
Mhm.
so we're talking about your ability to conceive of a maximally great being, which is hard but not impossible to conceive of in the first place. So yeah, it's hard to persuade people with that kind of an argument. But with that said, you and I both think it's a good and sound argument that we should add to our repertoire and share in at least some settings. But
Yeah,
anyway,
and I think it's almost like I would say it's like after you in baseball after you hit a double, it's the single that might bring someone home too. It's like,
yeah, there you
what
go.
once you have got someone thinking, well, yeah, maybe there was an uncaused cause or unmoved mover, maybe there was, that moral argument that's interesting, and then you bring in the ontological argument.
Yeah,
I think kind of as the pinch hitter, it's say,
yeah,
hey, now think of this. I think it can bring someone home. I
hmm,
actually do,
yeah, yeah.
but I don't know that it's a great one to start with.
Right, right. And I would just say, in I can't think of a time, and I share the gospel and back it up with apologetics all the time. I can't think of a time where I've used the ontological argument in that setting, although I've taught it many times. And I even teach it at Trinity Theological Seminary. But they're different. Now, I'm not opposed to somebody leading it, but I've never even had to use it as a pinch hitter. I've
Yeah.
been able to get my guy on base, get him saved. So I guess in this discussion, or in this, I can't think of what I'm trying in this scenario. With just using the kalam and the moral and the resurrection argument, and oftentimes I do use the free thinking argument too. I've had a lot of success with that, but yeah, I'm definitely willing to use the ontological argument as a pinch hitter. I've just haven't had the opportunity. I haven't needed it. Yeah, right.
Yeah.
Okay, so let's now get back to culture again. So one thing I love about your work, Josh, is that you start with a sound systematic theology and ultimate reality. All right, you're a theologian first.
Yeah.
And then you build upon that foundation, and you use apologetics to supplement. I mean, apologetics is a branch of theology, so you take it seriously. But as someone who has their systematic theology in place, or at least you've got most of it constructed, and you're continuing to build the outer edges, I guess. Now that gives you, with the sound systematic theology and ultimate reality in place, that lets you build upon that foundation. So since our culture in which we live is built upon this foundation of ultimate reality, whether anybody realizes that or not, now you have a lot to say about what's being constructed on top of the foundation in which you're aware. So you have so much to say about how we as Christians should interact with this, you called it the post-Christian culture in which we now find ourselves. So here's my question to you, Josh. How should the church interact and live in a post-Christian culture?
Yeah, it's a great question. I think we need to get away from the model of the 70s, 80s, 90s, where we say our church is open, people will come. People will come, but generally speaking, I've been in ministry for 12 years, 13 years still, and I'm working at a church right now still. And generally speaking, the people who come are the people who have already believed or just always gone to church, that sort of thing. And there's not a lot of going. And so I think the church needs to, and I think it's coming around, needs to switch away from that seeker idea of if we open our doors and we preach great sermons, people will come and know Jesus. That might work in some situations still, but I think fewer and far between. I think what we need to equip the saints, equip people to understand basic sound doctrine, and say, go and live your life according to sound doctrine. I think the American church now is more closely related to the first century church than it ever has been. It's being pushed to the margins. It's this crazy sect. You're Christian nationalists, all these sorts of things. But we still have this lofty platform of free speech that is still available to us. Let's use it, right? The more people doing YouTube videos, that sort of stuff, the more people talking about who God is, who Jesus is, and equipping people with sound doctrine, the more we're going to be able to have those conversations with people. So that's number one. Number two, when we have conversations, I think one of the things we've done a poor job with is defining terms. We are in a post-Christian culture. The word love doesn't mean what it meant in 1994. Okay. And so we have to define that. So when somebody says, well, isn't God love? And you say, well, yeah, but what do you think love is? Like, we need to get down to that level. And I liken it to when you're sharing, this, you've done the Maven Salt Lake City share with Mormons. When you go share that, there you go, the shirt's on. Yeah. When you go share with Mormons about Jesus, you have to define terms because they use so many of the same words that have different definitions. And we're living in a culture right now. Truth has a different definition. Love has a different definition. And salvation has a different definition in progressive circles. And so we need to equip people with those definitions. Whereas before it was just kind of a part of our cultural imaginary. I don't know if you've read Carl Trueman's book, Rise and Triumph of the Modern Self.
I have it, but I have not yet read it.
Yeah, I just finished it like about a month ago. And he does a great job of breaking down why those things have changed over time. It's a little bit dense, but it's good. But I think that's the aspect we need to talk to our kids when they say, "Well, shouldn't we love people?" Say, instead of just saying, "Well, yeah, but love is," say, "Okay, well, what do you think love is?" And then let's look at scripture and see what love is. And I spoke at Cornerstone Christian School this like a month ago, and one of the things that I talked about was this idea of love. And I said, if God is love and Jesus is God, and we believe that, then Jesus was a loving person on earth. And if he loved anybody, he loved his disciples, right?
Yeah.
And he said that Peter was the person he was going to build his church with, right?
Mm-hmm.
But look how he treats Peter when Peter steps out of line. When Peter starts denying the fact that he's going to have to die, he says what to Peter?
Called him Satan.
Get behind me, Satan.
Behind me.
Was Jesus not being loving in that moment?
Right. Yeah.
No, he was, because he was correcting Peter's error, and he had the relationship with Peter to be able to do that. But we think that that is anathema in our culture.
Right.
We can't call people to the carpet. I think as churches, as pastors, as people equipping people, we have to be able to do that. When somebody says, well, we need to love people, and that means affirming everything that they do, and Jesus can meet them right there, and they don't have to change. We need to, in effect, say, that's a message from Satan, and that's not true. Let's talk about what truth is. So, yeah, I don't know if that's convoluted, but that's kind of where I kind of hone in on. Let's define those terms, and let's be loving in truth the way Jesus was. You know, he flipped some tables too. So
that's right.
We can do that. Not out of not being unself-controlled, but picking our spots where it's going to be effective to share the gospel. So
yeah, and it wasn't like Jesus was like that on a regular basis and with most people. He would do that when it was the most loving thing to do,
exactly,
in that extreme situation. And so that's good for us to keep in mind. Jesus would go out of his way to love and encourage others, even those who were wrong. But he had his harshest words for Peter, his closest disciple, and for other religious people. So it's we just need to, when people ask what would Jesus do, we have to keep the entire the entire Bible in mind here, and not just with our favorite verses. But
he was very gentle with people who didn't quite know what truth was or what truth is, but he was very direct with people who intentionally obfuscated what truth is and who God is. And he was very direct with them. The Pharisees, the Sadducees, they should have known, and he handled them like they should have known.
Yeah, they should have known. That's right. And it's those who should know better or are not being careful with the gifts they've given them, that I think Jesus will have the most judgment for. And that's going to include a lot of Christians. And by the way, that whole line I just said of those who are not being careful with the gifts God has given them, I would argue implies libertarian freedom. But that's a topic for another conversation. You talk about Jesus. Have you watched the Chosen series?
I have never seen it. No, people say I should, but
man, let me tell you, my parents were telling me forever that I had to watch it, and I just kept putting it off. And finally, I watched the first episode with them, and then I binge watched the 2 seasons. I highly recommend it. I think the guy that plays Jesus, it just brings tears to my eyes. I think that he does such a good job of portraying how Jesus probably was in most of these circumstances. Just love it. You can just see the love that he has for people, but also this fire of truth that burns within him. I highly recommend The Chosen to you and to everybody watching. But all right, next question. I want to ask you about your favorite book, and no, you cannot count the Bible as your favorite book. I know that's your answer. So it's the Bible is your favorite book. What's your second favorite book? What's the next book that has had the biggest impact on your life, and one that you would recommend to our audience?
Yeah, so I'm going to actually pick two here, a recent one and the one that really, I know a lot of people go back to this. This is like a really cliche answer, but when I was having a lot of questions about who God is, even I was in the midst of ministry and listening to
Yeah.
people like uh, uh, Christopher Hitchens, Sam Harris, those
Right.
people,
Yeah.
and being like, man, these guys they're sharp, and I'm trying to figure it out. I actually cracked open Mere Christianity and
Yeah.
read through it,
Nice.
and I try to read through that book once a year, maybe more. Not because it's the gospel or anything, but it just breaks everything down into just simple terms. I'm also a huge fan of the way C.S. Lewis writes. I just think it's very almost melodic the way he writes, and just it's easy to read. So I always point people to that. I was going to say your book, but I still haven't read that yet. But maybe Mere Molinism will be up there.
Come on, man.
We'll get it. We'll get taken care of.
All right.
And then actually two of the most recent books that I really enjoy: Stephen Meyer, Return of the God Hypothesis. I don't know if you've read that.
Yeah.
It's a very good book. Really enjoy the way he breaks things down. I want to read it again just because he's such a high level thinker. I want to read it again just to break that down. And then I'd already referenced it before, but The Rise and Triumph of the Modern Self by Carl Trueman is, I think, is necessary reading for pastors. Personally,
Wow.
I think as a pastor, you should read that book so you know why we're in the cultural moment we're in, because he breaks it down from the Enlightenment and on. And you need to have some background in philosophy and poetry even to kind of understand the way he breaks some of the things down. And I think there's a popular version called A Strange New World. I'm not sure. I can't remember if that's the title of it. That might be a little bit easier to read, but I haven't read that one. But yeah, those are some books that I would definitely, hey, look at those. Yeah.
Yeah. Yeah. Well said. I think about when I first started my apologetics and deep theology journey. One of our mutual friends, or at least of him, David Oldham, was working here at the church with me and your dad at the time, and he gave me Reasonable Faith to read. And so this was probably back in 2009 maybe, and I tried to read. I got through like the first 2 chapters. I was like, oh, this is too hard. And then On Guard came out, and I was like, okay, I can handle this. And I went through that, read every word, and I got it. And then I went back to Reasonable Faith, and since I started with On Guard, that allowed me to then read through Reasonable Faith and understand that. So Dr. Craig's work, which I've just continued to devour ever since, has had a huge impact on me. So I would just throw out to those watching,
absolutely,
if you haven't read On Guard yet, get that and try to get through that. Also, another book, since you mentioned C.S. Lewis, I'll mention an oldie but a goodie, The Knowledge of the Holy by A.W. Tozer.
Yeah.
And that's something that everybody can read. But man, his insight, and I talk about it all the time. People probably get sick of me quoting him, but Tozer says the most important thing about a person is what comes into their mind when they think about God. Wow, that's exactly right. That's the most important thing about you, is how you think about God. Are you thinking about God correctly? Do you have the highest view of God, the true view of God, or do you have a low view of God? And then he goes on to say that the church is guilty for advancing this low view of God over the centuries. And he says this low view of God, he says it's so low and so ignoble, it's not even worthy of thinking, worshiping men and women. That's why I spend so much time talking about perfect being theology and a maximally great being, as opposed to this low view of God that's been advanced by the church. And Tozer then goes on to say that this low view that the church has advanced is responsible for multitudes of lesser evils in the world today. And I was like, man, it's good. So so we've got Knowledge of the Holy, On Guard. We got C.S. Lewis and Mere Christianity.
Yeah.
And then Truman's book. What is it?
The Rise and Triumph of the Modern Self.
Yeah. There's four books you got to start with.
Yeah, I would totally echo On Guard, and also I made a living off of listening to Dr. Craig's debates when I was when I was going through stuff. Like probably my favorite debate was his debate with Sean Carroll, just because
Oh yeah.
I thought it was the most interesting because I thought Sean Carroll took a tactic that I won't get into it, but it was different than the other debates.
Yeah.
And I know a lot of people have said that William Lane Craig lost that debate. I actually disagree.
Yeah, me too.
Because I think he stuck to the issues at hand. But he really brought me out of my funk with a lot of those questions. Like just everything he said was, oh yeah, actually that makes more sense. And I think that's why people don't like debating him. But
Yeah, I thought Carroll performed really well. He came across as confident, and he didn't. I mean, yeah, I mean, I think about my one and only debate with James White, and especially when I got to the cross examination, I got really nervous, and I don't think I performed well, even if I think my arguments won the day. I think my opening speech and my rebuttals behind the microphone were fine, but I think about how Sean Carroll just came across. I was like, dang, he did a good job. He definitely scored some showman points, I guess, or some points that I lost when it came to style. He was very good when it came to style, but so good that it kind of came across as if he won. If the laymen were watching, right? But as people start to unpack over the years, that came out several years ago now, and even on the FreeThinking Ministries website, we've got some articles about the substance to that debate. If you look at the substance, Dr. Craig won that debate, and it was a great debate. The one, my favorite Craig debate probably is his debate a couple years ago with Eric Wielenberg, and talking about objective morality, and it even got into Molinism a little bit and how that theology strengthens Craig's view, and so that's why I really liked that one. But I think probably if I were going to recommend somebody who's never watched a debate before, start out with Dr. Craig's debate versus Christopher Hitchens.
Yeah.
It took place on the Biola University campus, and that's the one that just had a huge impact on my life. And I realized, wow, here's one of the most aggressive and well-spoken atheists in the world today, Christopher Hitchens. And Dr. Craig, as some atheist had said, I think it's some atheist magazine, online magazine or something, said that Christopher Hitchens got spanked by William Lane Craig.
Yeah. It almost seemed like he was unprepared. It was
right.
He didn't take it seriously, I don't think. So no, that's a great one.
Yeah. So what really, to our viewers, if you haven't seen that, go on YouTube. I think you can find this on Dr. Craig's YouTube channel. Just search for it; it'll come up. William Lane Craig versus Christopher Hitchens. That's the debate everybody needs to start with. All right. So speaking of these new atheists, Christopher Hitchens, he is now the late Christopher Hitchens, but he was one part of what was called the Four Horsemen of New Atheism. Now, one of his colleagues, so you had Christopher Hitchens, you had Richard Dawkins, you had Daniel Dennett, and then you had Sam Harris. Now, you and I have discussed Sam Harris, who I believe today, at this point, at the moment of recording here, I believe that Sam Harris might be the world's most influential of the remaining horsemen of new atheism. Now, I've responded to him and multiple blogs and a forthcoming academic journal article that I co-authored with J.P. Moreland. I correspond with Sam Harris even in my book. And you have recently now responded to Sam Harris in your writing. So why do you find Sam Harris's objective morality based on human flourishing unconvincing?
Yeah, Sam Harris is actually my favorite of the Four Horsemen.
I agree.
I actually think he's reasonable. He's really enjoyable to listen to. Doesn't get worked up and angry. I think Richard Dawkins just is difficult to listen to because he's just so angry. he comes across as angry anyway. But Sam Harris, in the moral landscape, he says basically there's objective morality. I applaud him for recognizing that life cannot really exist well as a society without objective morality. But the reason I just don't find his argument convincing is because if you read through his book and you listen to his arguments, he gives like this example of everything that could ever possibly bad happen to this lady. And if everything bad happens to her, we know that's evil. And so we want the opposite of that, human flourishing. That's the objective moral compass of humanity. The reason I don't find it convincing is because he doesn't ever really define what flourishing is. It's kind of what he thinks it is. And so I think that he kind of makes himself God in that sense. And you almost have to, because you have to say, well, I understand that other people might have another idea of what human flourishing is, but this is actually human flourishing. And I usually bring Hitler or Stalin back into the equation, because actually what they were doing, whether you believe it or not, what they actually were doing, and you can read their manifestos, read Mein Kampf. I don't even know if you can read it anymore, but you can find it somewhere. If you read it, what they're actually doing is they thought they were contributing to human flourishing.
Right.
They thought what they could do was eliminate the bad in society. In fact, Hitler does take cultural Darwinism to its reasonable end. I know there's a lot that's been made about Hitler's religiosity, but it was more occult. It was more a fascination with the occult than anything. But he thought he was participating in human flourishing by doing what he was doing. So to Sam Harris's point, I wonder why that's wrong. If you can kill a bunch of people so that a bunch of other people can flourish, why is that correct? Why is that not correct?
Right.
And so I haven't really heard him articulate a response to it, because people have asked him that question. I'm not the first one to think of it. I haven't. Famously, Jordan Peterson basically asked him that question in their conversation in Vancouver. And I haven't heard his response, or maybe I haven't seen a good one that was really convincing or made me think that he was actually basing it in anything other than his own opinion. He says he's basing it in facts, scientific facts, but there's a leap there. You have to make a leap. And he doesn't really acknowledge the leap. So if you get a chance, I think there's a great back and forth between Sam Harris and Jordan Peterson. I think it was in Vancouver, that you can go to and listen to, where really Jordan Peterson hammers this idea away. Like, well, you're just introducing hell. You're just introducing theology. And Sam Harris doesn't see it. But Jordan Peterson says, that's all you're doing, is you're introducing theology here, but you don't want to call it that. That's basically what Jordan Peterson says. So that's the reason I don't find it particularly.
I love Jordan Peterson.
Yeah.
Just love Jordan Peterson. I call him the gateway drug to Christianity.
Yeah. His daughter converted to Christianity. I don't know if you knew that.
Did she?
Yeah.
Well, I think Jordan Peterson is well on his way. I think it's only a matter of time. At least that's what I hope and pray for. But he sure, I've also called him the modern day C.S. Lewis, and you can go back and look at C.S. Lewis's transformation over time. And it seems like Jordan Peterson is in that same kind of a process. But yeah, I mentioned one forthcoming journal article that I have coming out. I have another one coming out in early 2023 discussing the John Schellenberg's hiddenness objection against the existence of God. And I bring up Jordan Peterson and some real conversations that I've had with folks who God has, in fact, I've got their permission to even discuss this, but who were atheists and wouldn't listen to Christians, but would read Jordan Peterson because he wasn't a Christian. And then Jordan Peterson got them so close to Christianity that the gospel finally made sense and they gave their lives to Christ. So it provides a good, Jordan Peterson provides a great example of why God wouldn't just bring every non-resistant non-believer to Christ just like that. He has good reason for letting some people remain on this journey and being open to the existence of God, even if they're not yet convinced that God does exist or anything like that. So anyway, let's pray for Jordan Peterson. Pray that he finishes that journey strong.
Absolutely.
So,
yep.
Yeah. Anything else you want to say about Sam Harris?
No, I think he would do himself a favor if he actually interacted with Christian theology the way it is. That's one of my article was on his ridiculous notion that Christians believe that heaven's somehow based in space.
Right.
And it's just not honest.
Mm-hmm.
So, he tends to do that. There just seems to be a disdain for that. I also think he minimizes the atheistic the problems atheism has caused in society over time, and maximizes the problems that fundamentalist Christians have. So he'll dismiss communism like, oh, it doesn't exist anymore, so it doesn't matter. But he'll go back to the Crusades, it's but I don't find his arguments particularly persuasive, but I do think he's honestly dealing with them.
Well, good points about Sam Harris. I guess I would just say that I think Harris's view of objective morality fails because it lacks two key components. One would be a lack of objective purpose on his view, and the second would be a lack of human libertarian freedom on his view. So on Sam Harris's view, humanity is an accident of nature, right? And so we were not created on purpose or for any specific purpose. We're a happy accident of nature, and the laws and events of nature then causally determine everything about humanity. In fact, Sam even makes it clear in his free will book that we are not responsible for any of our thoughts, right? What we think of or how we think about it. These intentions, that he actually uses that word, intentions, where he's talking about intentionality, what we think of or about and how we think of and about it. So Harris is clear that antecedent conditions, or these prior conditions of which we are unaware, and he says, and over which we have no conscious control, that these things determine all of our thoughts and intentional states, our states of consciousness, intentionality here. And he is clear that he says it twice, we are not responsible for these things, including our thoughts. Right. And ultimately our beliefs. And that includes all of his thoughts and beliefs that he's communicating in his book. So he says we're not responsible for any of this, yet he wants to argue that we are morally responsible. So it seems to me that his two books, his two views seem to contradict each other. He's got the moral landscape and then his book on free will, saying that we don't have free will. It really seems that they're opposed to each other. They don't fit together nicely. So now, on the other hand, if Christianity is true, not only is there objective purpose to life, we also have libertarian freedom to choose to live according to our objective purpose or not. So if Christianity is true, God created humanity on purpose and for the specific purpose of love and to flourish, loving each other and flourishing with each other, right? Now, this follows, you just start with Jesus's greatest commands, love God and everybody love everybody. In the same book, he even talks about even loving those who consider you to be an enemy. Love, love, love. It's all about love. Love your neighbor as yourself. That even means love yourself, just not more than any other person, because that would be selfish. But anyway, if humanity was created on purpose and for a specific purpose, then there are objective facts about humanity, irrespective of the subjective opinions from or of humanity. And this provides a foundation for objective morality that Sam Harris doesn't have access to. And moreover, if Christianity is true, humans have libertarian freedom to choose sin or take the way of escape God promises to provide in 1 Corinthians 10:13. So when one does not love his or her neighbor, one could have done otherwise and taken the way of escape God promises to provide. That's libertarian freedom. And therefore, when we fail, when we don't take the way that God has promised, that way of escape that God provides, we're morally guilty because we could have taken it. Nothing determined us and prevented us from taking it. So we're the ones that are responsible in a desert sense. By desert sense, I mean we deserve blame for not taking the way of escape that God provided. Now, Sam Harris does not have access to either objective purpose or libertarian freedom on his view. He opposes both. So ultimately, on Harris's view, it's not objectively true that humanity ought to flourish. So when he wants to appeal to flourishing, my next question is it objectively true that we ought to flourish?
Mm-hmm.
Or are we like a cancer, as Agent Smith said in The Matrix? And if Agent Smith is right, then humanity is bad for the flourishing of the universe, and at least the planet. And so therefore, maybe we ought not flourish. So who's right, Agent Smith or Sam Harris? Who's got, it's both subjective opinions, I guess. But on Harris's view, it's not objectively true that humanity ought to flourish, but it is objectively true that humanity ought to flourish if Christianity is true. So Christians, we can agree that humans ought to flourish for eternity, and that's why we were created. And we can ground this because, like I said, God created humanity on purpose and for the specific purpose of eternal flourishing. And Jesus told us how to maximize human flourishing on earth and how to have perfect flourishing into the infinite future and beyond, as Buzz Lightyear would say. With all that said, what do you think, Josh?
I think, you said it better than I did, but I think that's what I was getting at when I said his definition of flourishing is severely lacking. You don't know what it even means to flourish as human beings. If he says that free will is an illusion, I think that's the word he uses. It's and so the idea of even flourishing, what does that even mean if we don't have free will? A lot of the ideas of flourishing is I get to do what I want, that sort of thing. On an atheistic sense, even I get to find pleasure, but the biblical worldview offers you a definition of flourishing. Jesus does. I come that you may have life and have it to the full. Well, that's flourishing. What does that look like? And so you can affirm that, flourishing is an objective good for humanity. What does that look like? Well, it can only be found in giving God glory. That's it. And that can only be done through Jesus Christ. And so because he doesn't have the tools in atheism to define flourishing in any way other than a subjective sense, in my opinion, then he fails his own argument. It seems like an oxymoronic argument to say, well, objective morality exists, but free will doesn't, because then you can never be objectively immoral. Because how are you supposed to behave in a certain way if you are engineered to behave in a different way, and you have no options to do otherwise? Right. So I think that's exactly right.
Well, cool. Look, I'm really looking forward to reading your articles, your forthcoming articles, and also having you as a regular guest on this YouTube channel. So with that said, is there anything else that you'd like to say before we sign off?
Yeah, I think if you just want to follow me for other content, even on Twitter, at Josh R. Klein, pretty active on there. Anything from religion, theology, to politics, to sports, runs the gambit. You might get my opinions on Husker football. I don't know. But yeah, you can find me there. I'd encourage you to do that. Interact. I love interacting, conversations with people. And look for got some articles in the works coming up towards the end of the month here that I think should be good approaches to certain issues. Yeah.
Very good. Very good. Well, thank you so much for taking time to talk to me today, Josh, and we'll do this again soon. And to everybody watching, make sure to subscribe to the FreeThinking Ministries YouTube channel and follow us at freethinkinc.org. That's freethinkinc.org. Make sure you follow us so you don't miss anything from Josh Klein and our other awesome contributors. So until next time, stay reasonable.